Welcome back to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates.
Sometimes I do get a little mad when I don't have the quiet time that I think I should have or want right then. But he was the man in black, the rebel poet of country, gospel and rock music. But behind that tough voice and calm look, Johnny Cash carried a storm of anger toward people he saw as fakes, backstabbers or reminders of hurt. His life was full of drug problems, love, losing people and strong angry feelings that lasted for many years. First on that list was Bob Dylan, a name said quietly, not loudly. They weren't just musicians, they were like prophets in the same storm, writing songs that hurt from the same wound Johnny had opened. Johnny had welcomed Dylan in Nashville, helped him into the special halls of country music royalty, made a place for him in a world that didn't always welcome strangers. But as Dylan turned away, mysterious, cold and hard to reach, Johnny watched their friendship fall apart. He wasn't met with thanks, he was met with distance. Not anger, not backstabbing in the loud way, but quiet. The kind that screams. To Johnny, that quiet was like a knife wrapped in soft cloth. He had stood up for Dylan when it mattered, and in return he became invisible. In letters never sent, Johnny wrote not of hate but of a broken heart, of a friend who forgot the fire that kept him warm. Dylan didn't attack him, he erased him. And for Johnny Cash, a man who loved loyalty like the Bible, that quiet rejection was louder than any backstabbing. Then came Elvis Presley. They rose together like twin giants of the South, two sons of Sun Records, two prophets in black singing the pain of a whole generation. But where Johnny fought his way through the mud of his mistakes toward being forgiven, Elvis let himself drown in fancy stuff. To Johnny, Elvis was like a warning ghost long before he died. He watched the king trade toughness for sparkle, church songs for newspaper headlines. Johnny never wanted the fame, he feared it. And in Elvis he saw what happened when a man lost track of his truth, when every song became an act and every smile became fake. Behind closed doors, Johnny got mad not at Elvis but at what he had become. He hated the people who managed him, the people who hung around him, the fake palace that turned a raw beautiful soul into an empty symbol. When Elvis's people began treating him like a king and everyone else like servants, Johnny couldn't hide his anger. He didn't want to bow down, he wanted to scream. What hurt most was that Johnny still loved him, or at least the boy from Tupelo who used to sing like he could save your soul. But by the time the pills took over and the jumpsuits got heavier, Johnny saw only sadness and felt only betrayal. He never called him an enemy, but in his eyes Elvis had done the worst sin. Not dying young, but dying forgotten by the man he once was. And that left Johnny bitter, sad not for a rival but for a fallen brother who'd never find his way back. Yeah, it was not a very happy Christmas for me. That was when I was getting lung sickness and that was the hard part. The surgery went fine. Then came Jerry Lee Lewis, a friend turned rival, then a bitter memory. Cash respected fire, he even lived in it. But Jerry Lee was a wildfire with no limits, destructive, crazy and hungry for attention. He didn't just play wild, he was chaos. Where Johnny turned pain into being forgiven, Jerry Lee threw his demons at the world and dared it to look away. They fought about everything, crowds, women, even the very idea of God. During one drunk angry speech backstage, Jerry made fun of Johnny's gospel years, laughing that his new faith was just a career trick. Johnny didn't fight back with fists, but the quiet that followed was like a volcano. It wasn't just an insult, it was a tear in something holy, and the split got bigger. Jerry once showed up to a concert so drunk that he destroyed an entire dressing room, then blamed Johnny's crew to escape getting in trouble. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was backstabbing. Cash stormed out, angry and embarrassed, and from that day forward erased Jerry from his world. He never spoke his name again, not in interviews, not in books about his life, not even to old friends. Because to Johnny, Jerry Lee wasn't just a ghost from the past, he was proof that talent without truth was a curse. And for a man who believed being forgiven had to be earned, Jerry's wild behavior was a wound that never stopped hurting. Waylon Jennings was a different story, brotherhood turned cold. They were highwaymen, bandmates, rebels. They had laughed in the face of Nashville's rules, toured like outlaws and shared stories soaked in whiskey and blood. But pride, like a hot coal in dry grass, can burn even the strongest bridges. Waylon watched Johnny walk the narrow path of staying sober and being saved, and couldn't stand it. "You're not one of us anymore," he reportedly said meanly as Johnny traded backstage fights for Bible verses. What Waylon saw as backstabbing, Johnny saw as surviving. But neither would give in. It wasn't hate at first, it was heartbreak. Johnny still cared, still wished Waylon would understand. But when Waylon publicly made fun of Johnny's prison concerts, calling them fake redemption shows, it hit a nerve too deep. That wasn't just making fun, it was a stab to the soul. Johnny saw in Waylon the man he used to be, wild, defiant, falling apart inside. But instead of understanding, Waylon threw stones. And so the warmth of brotherhood turned to Cold War. They stood on stage, yes, but not side by side, not truly. In interviews, Johnny grew quiet about Waylon. The hurt was still there. The quiet was louder than any outburst. Because when someone who once carried your pain turns their back on your healing, that cut doesn't fade, it gets worse. The next wound came from Chris Christopherson. They wrote together, drank together, prayed together. They weren't just people who worked together, they were brothers of the spirit, similar rebels trying to find light through the music. But when Johnny's world began to crack in the 70s, when the pills made the days blurry and faith got weak, Chris disappeared. Johnny didn't need a spotlight or pity, he needed a hand, a voice, a reminder he wasn't alone. But Chris, overwhelmed or scared, chose distance. "You vanished when I needed a hand," Johnny once told a friend, his voice low, not angry but empty. That quiet in his darkest hour felt like being abandoned. And for a man already fighting ghosts, it became unforgivable. Chris tried to return. He wrote him letters soaked in regret, sent songs that reached for forgiveness. But Johnny had already built a wall around his pain. And inside it, Chris's name had been scratched out like a prayer with no answer. When they finally met again, the hug was stiff, the handshake cold. No argument, no closure, just two men staring across a deep gap carved by time and backstabbing. And Johnny walked away knowing some friends don't leave with anger, they fade. And that kind of loss cuts deepest of all. Another target of Cash's quiet anger was David Allan Coe, the rebel of rebels. Coe was wild, unapologetic and wrapped in trouble. He pushed limits Johnny refused to even think about crossing lines of race, decency and artistic honesty. His song words were filled with hate, his shows were displays of chaos, often designed to make people mad rather than perform. Johnny didn't just disapprove, he was disgusted. Cash, a man who carried his mistakes like scars, couldn't stand Coe's use of shock for attention. He saw him not as a rebel but as a dangerous showman, one who mistook being rude for being brave. It boiled over when Coe took aim at Johnny himself, making fun of his recovery, his faith and his past. "A preacher with a pill problem," Coe had said in a mean interview, a quote that spread like poison through the music business. Johnny didn't respond with words, he responded with absence. Coe was banned from his tours, left off his guest lists and erased from his personal memory. In circles of young musicians, when his name came up, Johnny offered only one sentence: "That's what the devil sounds like when he sings with a smile." To Johnny, Coe wasn't just offensive, he was a threat to everything music should be, a reflection of pain, not a performance of it. Their divide wasn't just about right and wrong, it was spiritual. Then there was Merle Haggard, perhaps the deepest scar. They were allies once, prison-born poets, survivors who sang from the edge. But while Johnny wore his darkness like armor, Merle saw it as competition. Fame came for them both, but Merle couldn't ignore how the spotlight stayed longer on Johnny. The public loved the man in black. To Merle, it felt like a betrayal of their shared toughness. The break came quietly but cut deeply. Merle accused Johnny of making up his prison image, whispered words that spread like wildfire in Nashville. It wasn't just gossip, it was a direct attack on the very soul Johnny had shown to the world. Johnny's music wasn't a brand, it was his survival. And to have that questioned by someone he once considered a brother, it turned love into pain. Even as they stood side by side on stage in later years, the bond had already broken. Their harmonies were empty, their glances distant. Fans never saw the divide, but those closest did. Johnny never fought back publicly, but in his final journals, scribbled in shaky ink, he called Merle a man who mistook jealousy for justice, a line soaked in sadness, not spite. In the end, Merle wasn't just a friend lost, he was a chapter closed with regret, a reminder that some wounds don't bleed but still never heal. These weren't headline fights, they were quiet heartbreaks, spiritual betrayals, and moments where pride collapsed into sorrow. Johnny Cash never needed to yell, his silence could destroy. Each name was a silent chord in a song that was never played. Some were wounds left open for decades, others were scars hidden beneath layers of gospel verses and gravel-toned refrains. These were not petty rivalries, they were deep soul-twisting battles with men who mirrored his darkness or made fun of his light. To the public, Johnny was a legend, but behind closed doors he carried ghosts, names etched into memory not with hate but with grief. He didn't burn bridges, he watched them collapse and then walked alone through the smoke. And in the quiet corners of his legacy, these names remain carved in shadow, echoing through his songs like ghosts no one can see but everyone can feel.